Why is it that something so natural, so deeply human, remains so widely misunderstood? Why, in a world overflowing with information, do we still fail to understand women's arousal? We talk about sex all the time, online, in movies, and conversations, but we rarely talk about what truly ignites a woman's body, mind, and heart. Most people assume arousal is simple, mechanical, predictable, but women's arousal doesn't follow a straight line. It's not a light switch that turns on or off. It's more like a symphony that needs to be felt, not forced. Why did this misunderstanding begin? It began with silence, with centuries of silence around women's bodies, around their pleasure, around their truth. For generations, society built walls of modesty and morality that shut women out of their own sensations. The female body became something to hide, not to explore. Desire became shameful, curiosity became sinful, and pleasure became taboo. When we look back through history, we see how women's arousal was never truly studied for what it was. It was studied through the lens of control. Ancient medicine called women's desire hysteria. Their natural cycles were labeled as disorder. Even in early psychology, women who expressed sexual passion were often considered unstable or deviant. That misunderstanding didn't just happen, it was taught. It was repeated until women began to internalize it themselves. Think about this. For hundreds of years, men's arousal was seen as instinct, while women's was seen as emotion. One was celebrated as natural. The other was dismissed as unpredictable. That bias shaped science, culture, and the way we talk about sex to this very day. The idea that women are hard to understand or less sexual didn't come from biology. It came from a culture afraid of women's autonomy. Because to understand a woman's arousal is to understand her power, and power has always been something society tried to keep out of women's hands. From religious teachings to Victorian values, women were told that good girls don't want, they don't desire, they don't crave. Arousal was something to be controlled or concealed. Even today, these echoes persist. In classrooms where sex education skips over female pleasure, in relationships where women fake satisfaction because it's easier than explaining what they need, in media that reduces female sexuality to fantasy rather than feeling. But beneath all that noise, there's a truth that never disappeared. Women's arousal has always been there, alive, intelligent, waiting to be remembered. To understand where we went wrong, we have to understand that arousal is not a simple reflex. It's a reflection of the whole being. A woman's body doesn't just respond to touch. It responds to tone, to energy, to trust. Her mind and body are constantly communicating, deciding if it's safe to open or if it needs to protect. When society taught her to feel unsafe in her own body, it interrupted that natural conversation. That's why so many women say they feel numb or disconnected. It's not that their desire is gone. It's that their bodies have been taught to shut down. They've been taught to prioritize others' comfort over their own, to give instead of receive, to perform instead of feel. The misunderstanding begins the moment we forget that arousal is not about compliance. It's about connection. Science now supports what women have always known intuitively. The limbic system, the emotional center of the brain, plays a crucial role in sexual arousal. Emotional safety and stress are not side notes. They are central to desire. When a woman feels judged, criticized, or unseen, her brain literally sends signals to the body to close down. But when she feels understood, valued, and free, her nervous system relaxes, and her arousal awakens naturally. Yet, we still live in a culture that teaches women to override those signals. To smile when uncomfortable, to say yes when they want to say no, to please instead of express. Every time that happens, the body learns that safety and pleasure don't coexist, and that misunderstanding becomes internalized. It's time we call that out for what it is: conditioning. Cultural, generational conditioning that taught women to disconnect from themselves. You can see it in language, how we talk about women's bodies as mysteries to be solved, instead of experiences to be honored. How we say she's complicated, instead of asking, what does she need to feel safe? When a woman's arousal is misunderstood, so is her power, because arousal is not just physical. It's life force. It's energy, creativity, intuition, vitality. It's the current that fuels her capacity for love, compassion, and connection. When she's taught to suppress it, She doesn't just lose sexual pleasure. She loses access to her inner fire. That suppression shows up as fatigue, self-doubt, anxiety, and even illness. The body keeps the score, and it remembers every moment it was told not to feel. This misunderstanding began with the silencing of women's stories. For centuries, men wrote the narratives of desire. Medical texts, literature, even modern media. Most of it defined arousal from an external view. Few asked women what arousal actually feels like. Few listened to the rhythm of the female body from the inside out. When we read works like The Vagina Monologues by Eve Ensler or Women Who Run with the Wolves by Clarissa Pinkola Estes, we begin to see what happens when women finally reclaim their own narrative. They describe arousal not as something mechanical, but as something spiritual, emotional, alive. They speak of it as energy that connects them to their instincts, to their truth, to the pulse of life itself. But society's misunderstanding goes deeper than misinformation. It's about fear. Fear of women who know themselves. Fear of what happens when a woman listens to her body more than to authority. Because a woman who understands her arousal cannot be controlled. She cannot be easily manipulated by guilt or shame. She becomes guided by her own internal compass, and that kind of self-knowledge is revolutionary. To understand why society still struggles with this, we have to see how pleasure has been politicized. A woman's pleasure challenges power structures. It challenges the notion that her body exists to serve others. It demands equality, respect, and understanding. That's why even in modern times, conversations around women's arousal are dismissed as too explicit, too much, or inappropriate. It's not because the topic is unimportant, it's because it's powerful. When we start to talk openly about women's arousal, we start to unravel centuries of repression. We begin to expose the myths that told women their pleasure is secondary. We begin to heal the divide between mind and body, between desire and dignity. This healing begins with awareness. Awareness that female arousal doesn't look like the images we see in movies. It's slower, deeper, more relational. It's not always about lust. Sometimes it's about emotional closeness, touch, laughter, even being fully seen. A woman might feel aroused not just by physical sensation, but by emotional safety, by curiosity, by connection. That's why the old model of one-size-fits-all sexuality fails. Because women are not objects to be triggered. They are beings to be understood. Their arousal is not linear. It's dynamic. It ebbs and flows like nature itself. When we understand that, we stop asking, "What's wrong with her?" and start asking, "What might she need to feel safe enough to open?" And that one shift changes everything. Imagine if young girls grew up learning that their bodies are wise, that arousal is not shameful, that desire is a sign of life, not sin. Imagine if partners were taught to listen rather than assume, to slow down rather than rush, to see pleasure as communication, not conquest. How different would relationships feel? How much more empowered would women be to speak up, to explore, to express? The misunderstanding of women's arousal began in ignorance, but it continues through neglect. Even today, sexual education rarely includes the clitoris, the vulva, or the emotional landscape of arousal. Many women reach adulthood without ever being told what their bodies are capable of. Some discover it by accident. Others never do. That's not a personal failure, that's a cultural one. But the tide is changing. Women are speaking, learning, reclaiming. Therapists, educators, and medical experts like Dr. Lori Brotto, Dr. Emily Nagoski, and Dr. Jennifer Berman are helping rewrite the narrative. They remind us that arousal is not a performance. It's a process. That pleasure is not indulgent. It's essential. That connection begins not in the bedroom, but in the nervous system, in the heart, in the willingness to feel. The misunderstanding of female arousal began with silence. But silence is breaking, and what's emerging is a new understanding, one that sees women's pleasure as a vital part of human health, not as a secret to be hidden. Understanding female arousal means understanding humanity itself. Because when a woman feels safe enough to be fully in her body, she brings that safety into the world. She raises her children with more compassion. She leads with more empathy. She loves without fear. Arousal becomes more than sexuality. It becomes aliveness. And that is what society has missed for so long, that female arousal is not about sex, it's about life. It's the pulse of creation, the energy of intuition, the spark of vitality that fuels everything from art to connection to joy. When women are disconnected from that energy, the whole world loses color. But when they reconnect, the world blooms again. So yes, society has misunderstood female arousal, but that misunderstanding is not permanent. The truth is rising. Through research, through storytelling, through the courage of women who refuse to stay silent. The question now is not why we misunderstood, but how we will choose to understand. Will we continue to let shame dictate the narrative, or will we listen to science, to experience, to the voices that have been waiting to be heard? Because once we begin to truly understand women's arousal, we don't just heal sexuality, we heal generations of disconnection. We bring women back home to their bodies. And when that happens, the world itself begins to feel again. Pleasure is not a luxury. It is wisdom. It is healing. It is truth. And the more we learn to understand it, the more we understand what it means to be alive. The truth about how women's arousal actually works is far more intricate, far more intelligent, and far more beautiful than most of us were ever taught to believe. We've been conditioned to think of arousal as a physical reaction, a body responding to stimulation. But that's only part of the picture. For women, arousal is a full body, full mind, full heart experience. It's not just about what happens to her. It's about what happens within her. It begins in the brain, flows through the nervous system, and only then reaches the body. Think of it like this. A woman's arousal is like a delicate orchestra of signals, sensations, emotions, and hormones, all playing together, all responding to context, trust, and connection. It's not spontaneous like flipping a switch. It's responsive, meaning it unfolds in the presence of safety, curiosity, and genuine emotional resonance. When she feels seen and safe, her body relaxes, her mind opens, her senses sharpen. That's when arousal begins, not when the body is touched, but when the heart feels understood. Let's talk about the biology first. The brain is the most powerful sexual organ in the body. Specifically, the limbic system, the emotional center, is where desire and arousal start to awaken. The hypothalamus releases signals that increase blood flow, heart rate, and lubrication. The body begins to prepare itself not because of touch alone, but because the brain has received a message. I am safe. I am connected. I can open. But that safety is not just about the absence of danger. It's about the presence of trust. When a woman feels emotionally safe, when she senses that she can be herself without judgment, her parasympathetic nervous system, the part that controls relaxation, activates. That's when her body can shift from survival mode to pleasure mode. It's the biological foundation of arousal, relaxation before stimulation. Without that, pleasure becomes nearly impossible. This is why stress, shame, or fear are the biggest inhibitors of female arousal. The stress hormone cortisol directly suppresses the body's ability to feel pleasure. When a woman's mind is anxious, worried about how she looks, whether she's doing it right, whether she's loved, her body shuts down. It's not that she doesn't want to feel. It's that her body is protecting her from overwhelm. This is not dysfunction. It's intelligence. Her body knows that pleasure cannot coexist with threat. Contrast that with emotional connection. When a woman feels desired not just for her body but for her essence, her energy changes. Oxytocin, the bonding hormone, floods her system. It deepens intimacy and makes physical sensations feel richer. Dopamine and serotonin increase, heightening arousal and pleasure. This biological dance is what creates that glowing, magnetic, fully alive state we call desire. Now here's where the misunderstanding often happens. Many people think that arousal should happen instantly, like in movies or magazines. But women's bodies don't work that way. They're cyclical, not mechanical. Just like the seasons, arousal needs time to warm, to unfold. It's a process of awakening, not performance. When we rush it, the body resists. When we honor it, the body responds with depth and intensity. Arousal also doesn't always start with desire. Many women experience what's called responsive desire, meaning they don't necessarily feel aroused until they're already in a moment of closeness, connection, or touch. This doesn't mean something's wrong. It means her body and mind awaken through experience, not anticipation. When we understand this, we stop judging women for being slow or uninterested and start respecting that their arousal follows a different rhythm, one rooted in presence rather than urgency. Emotionally, arousal is tied to so much more than stimulation. It's tied to self-worth, to body image, to the stories a woman carries about her own sexuality. If she's been taught that her pleasure is shameful, her body will hesitate to open. If she's learned that her needs are secondary, her desire may go quiet. The mind holds memories of every message she's received about her body, every time she was told to stay small, every time she was made to feel unsafe. Those memories don't just disappear, they live in the nervous system, influencing her arousal long before the body even reacts. That's why healing and arousal are so deeply connected. As a woman begins to unlearn shame and return to her body with compassion, her arousal naturally awakens. It's like thawing out after being frozen for years. The more she feels safe in her own skin, the more she can experience the fullness of her pleasure. The pathway to arousal is the same as the pathway to healing. It begins with safety, honesty, and trust. The body itself is incredibly designed for pleasure. The clitoris alone has over 8,000 nerve endings, more than twice the number in the penis, and its only purpose is pleasure. Its structure extends deep inside the body, connecting to the vaginal walls and internal erectile tissue. This means arousal is not limited to one area. It's a full-body experience. The skin, the breath, the mind all participate. When a woman is aroused, her body doesn't just prepare for sex. It prepares for connection. But connection requires more than touch. It requires presence. Presence is the most powerful aphrodisiac there is. When a woman feels that her partner is truly with her, not distracted, not performing, but attuned, her body responds. The eyes, the breath, the energy exchange, all of it tells her nervous system, you are safe here. That's when she can let go, when the body stops guarding and starts feeling. And that's also why self-connection matters just as much as partner connection. A woman's arousal thrives when she's in relationship with herself, when she takes time to know what she likes, what she needs, what her body says yes or no to. Too many women have been taught to prioritize others' pleasure over their own, but arousal is an act of self-knowledge. When she listens to her body, honors her boundaries, and explores what brings her alive, she becomes her own source of power. Emotionally, arousal also ties into creativity and expression. When a woman suppresses her emotions, anger, sadness, desire, she suppresses her aliveness. Those emotions are part of the same current that fuels her sexual energy. That's why emotional release, crying, movement, laughter, can sometimes awaken desire. The energy that was locked inside finally begins to flow again. Pleasure is energy in motion, and yet many women have learned to fear their own energy. They've been told that their bodies are too much, their needs too demanding, their pleasure too loud. So they shrink, they disconnect, they go numb. But numbness is not emptiness, it's protection. The body shuts down what it cannot safely express. Healing arousal, then, is about creating conditions where that expression becomes safe again. Biologically, the vulva and vagina also respond dynamically to arousal. As blood flow increases, tissues swell, sensitivity heightens, and natural lubrication begins. This is not just about readiness. It's the body's way of saying, I'm open. But if the mind is anxious, if there's fear or disconnect, that physiological process can stall. Again, this isn't dysfunction, it's wisdom. The body will not open in the presence of fear, and it shouldn't have to. When we understand that arousal is not just physical, we begin to see how emotional intimacy is the foundation of sexual pleasure. Communication, trust, empathy. These are not just emotional needs. They are biological prerequisites for desire. A woman's brain needs to know she is emotionally safe before it allows her body to relax into arousal. And here's something rarely acknowledged. Women's arousal can also be deeply spiritual. It's not only about sex, it's about energy, connection, and presence. In many ancient cultures, sexual energy was seen as sacred, as the source of life force and creation. Practices like Tantra understood this well, that arousal is a doorway into deeper consciousness. When a woman feels truly connected to her body, she's not just experiencing pleasure. She's experiencing her own power, her own divine energy. That's the truth that centuries of misunderstanding have hidden. Arousal is not just about physical stimulation. It's about embodiment. It's the body's way of saying, I am here. I am alive. When women reclaim that truth, they reclaim a part of themselves that the world has long tried to quiet. But understanding female arousal also requires patience. Because when trauma, shame, or chronic stress live in the body, arousal can't just be turned on. It must be nurtured. It must be invited gently, consistently with compassion. For some women, that means starting with non-sexual touch, breathing, movement, mindfulness, reconnecting to sensations without pressure. For others, it means emotional healing, talking, crying, expressing what's been held in. Every woman's journey is different, but the goal is the same, to feel safe enough to feel again. Arousal, at its core, is about presence. When the mind and body align, when fear dissolves into trust, when judgment gives way to curiosity, the body blooms. And that blooming doesn't always look like what we imagine. It might be a soft sigh, a wave of warmth, a deep breath of relief. That too is arousal, the body coming home to itself. So how does women's arousal actually work? It works through safety, through connection, through self-acceptance. It works when the nervous system is calm, when the heart feels open, when the mind lets go of self-criticism. It's not something to be forced. It's something to be allowed. It's the natural response of a body that feels safe enough to feel alive. When we start to understand this, everything changes. We stop seeing arousal as something mysterious or complicated. We stop blaming women for not responding fast enough. We begin to honor the process, the rhythm, the intelligence of her body. And in doing so, we create the space for true intimacy, where pleasure is not an act, but a state of being. The truth is, women's arousal is not broken. It never was. It's been buried under layers of misunderstanding, fear, and disconnection. But when we strip that away, when we listen to what the body has been saying all along, we discover something profound. Arousal is the body's language of trust, of connection, of life itself. It's not a performance, it's a pulse. Not a mystery, it's nature. And the more we understand it, the more we understand what it truly means to be whole. The connection between pleasure, safety, and emotional intimacy in women is not just psychological, it's biological, emotional, and profoundly spiritual. It's a connection woven so deeply into the female body that one cannot exist fully without the others. Pleasure, for women, is not something that simply happens in the body. It unfolds in the nervous system. It grows in the heart. It breathes in the space where trust lives. Without safety, pleasure becomes guarded. Without intimacy, it feels incomplete. But when safety and intimacy are present, the body begins to bloom into its most natural state, aliveness. To understand this, we have to look at how the human body responds to safety itself. Safety is not an abstract feeling. It's a biological state. When a woman feels safe, her parasympathetic nervous system activates. Her breathing slows, her muscles relax, her blood vessels dilate, her body opens because it no longer needs to protect itself. That openness is the foundation of pleasure. It's the body's way of saying, I can trust this moment. But when a woman feels unsafe, emotionally, physically, or even energetically, her body tightens. Her heart rate rises, her cortisol levels increase, and her body shifts into protection mode. In that state, pleasure is nearly impossible because the body is not designed to feel desire and danger at the same time. A woman's arousal cannot coexist with fear. It waits, patiently, for safety. That's why emotional intimacy plays such a vital role. Emotional intimacy is not just about love or affection. It's about being seen, being known, being accepted. When a woman feels emotionally safe with someone, her nervous system relaxes in their presence. Her body reads every tone of voice, every gesture, every pause, asking, "Can I trust you?" And when the answer is yes, when she senses genuine care, respect, and presence, her body begins to open. That's when pleasure becomes not just possible, but profound. We often think of pleasure as something physical, something that happens on the surface. But for women, pleasure is an experience of deep surrender. It's the body's natural response to being fully seen, fully respected, fully safe. This is why so many women say they need to feel emotionally connected before they can feel physically aroused. It's not a preference, it's how their biology works. The same oxytocin that bonds a mother to her child, that deepens feelings of love and connection, is also released during arousal. It's the hormone of safety, trust, and belonging, and it's what allows the female body to relax into pleasure. When a woman feels emotionally disconnected or unsafe, her body doesn't just shut down physically, it closes emotionally too. She may go through the motions, but inside, there's a wall. Her body knows when it's being rushed, when it's being seen as an object rather than a being. It knows when touch is mechanical rather than mindful. That knowing lives deep within her cells. It's ancient, instinctive wisdom designed to protect her from harm. Safety, then, is not a luxury. It's the foundation of arousal. And safety is not just about physical comfort. It's emotional safety that truly matters. It's the feeling that she can express herself without fear of rejection or ridicule. It's knowing that her no will be respected as much as her yes. It's feeling free to make sounds, to move, to explore, to feel without judgment. When a woman feels that kind of safety, her body begins to awaken in ways that can't be forced. This is also why pleasure has such a powerful connection to healing. Pleasure tells the body that it's safe. When a woman experiences genuine pleasure, when she allows herself to feel deeply without fear, her nervous system rewires. Her body learns that safety and pleasure can coexist. This is the opposite of trauma, which teaches the body that safety and pleasure cannot exist together. Every moment of genuine pleasure becomes an act of healing, a reclaiming of her right to feel. Many women carry silent memories of disconnection, times when their bodies were not respected, when their boundaries were ignored, or when they were shamed for their desires. Those memories don't disappear. They live in the body. The muscles remember. The breath remembers. And often, the body holds that tension until it's shown that it doesn't need to protect anymore. That's what emotional intimacy offers. It tells the body, you can exhale now. When we speak about intimacy, we often mistake it for sex. But intimacy is not about physical closeness. It's about emotional transparency. It's about being seen without armor. For many women, this is what truly opens the door to pleasure. Because when she feels emotionally safe, she no longer has to manage or perform. She can let go. She can surrender to sensation, to connection, to presence. And that surrender is what transforms pleasure from fleeting to transcendent. The connection between safety and pleasure is also visible in the chemistry of the brain. Oxytocin and dopamine, the hormones of bonding and pleasure, reinforce one another. When a woman feels emotionally connected, her brain releases more oxytocin, which in turn enhances arousal. That arousal then increases dopamine, the feel-good neurotransmitter that heightens pleasure and reward. This creates a positive feedback loop of connection, trust, and desire. It's not just emotional, it's neurochemical harmony, but if that connection is broken, if she feels unseen, dismissed, or pressured, the opposite happens. The stress response activates, cortisol rises, and the flow of pleasure hormones slows down. The brain shifts from openness to protection. It's not that she doesn't want pleasure. It's that her body no longer feels safe enough to receive it. This is where communication becomes essential. Because emotional intimacy is built not just on love, but on understanding. A woman's arousal responds to empathy, to being listened to, cared for, and emotionally attuned. When she feels emotionally connected, she experiences touch differently. What might have felt neutral before can now feel electric, sacred, deeply fulfilling. The same touch, but a completely different experience, because the emotional context has changed. It's also important to understand that safety and pleasure don't just come from others. They can and must come from within. A woman's relationship with herself is the foundation of her capacity for pleasure. If she doesn't feel safe within her own body, if she's constantly judging herself, comparing herself, criticizing her appearance, her body won't relax. That inner voice becomes the very thing that blocks arousal. Healing begins when she learns to speak to herself with kindness, to approach her body not as something to fix, but as something to listen to. When a woman feels emotionally connected to herself, she begins to experience pleasure in new ways. She starts noticing the warmth of sunlight on her skin, the taste of food, the rhythm of her breath. Pleasure stops being something that happens to her. It becomes a way of being. This kind of embodied pleasure radiates far beyond the bedroom. It shows up in how she moves, how she speaks, how she exists in the world. Pleasure, safety, and intimacy are not separate experiences. They are one continuous flow of connection. Emotional intimacy also means honesty. The freedom to express what feels good, what doesn't, what she wants, what she fears. Many women are afraid to speak about pleasure because they've been taught that wanting is shameful. But when she begins to use her voice to articulate her desires and boundaries, she creates the conditions for deeper intimacy. Speaking honestly is a form of safety. It tells her body, I have agency. I am in control. And that sense of control paradoxically allows her to let go more fully. There's something deeply healing about being met with presence. When a partner looks at her with genuine attention, when they slow down enough to listen, something inside her softens. The armor she's carried begins to dissolve. The body that's been tense begins to release. And what rises in its place is pleasure. Not the kind that's loud or performative, but the kind that hums quietly through every cell. The kind that says, I am here. I am safe. I am free. Safety is the soil. Pleasure is the flower. Without safety, pleasure cannot grow, and intimacy is the sunlight that allows that flower to bloom. This is the truth of women's arousal. It's not just about stimulation, but about connection. Arousal is an emotional language. Every touch says something. Every glance carries meaning. The body listens not to words, but to energy. This is also why emotional wounds can so deeply affect desire. When a woman has experienced betrayal, neglect, or emotional disconnection, her body remembers. She might crave intimacy, but her body hesitates, holding its breath, waiting for proof that it's safe to open again. Healing in this context is not about forcing arousal. It's about rebuilding trust. Trust in herself, in her body, and if she chooses, in her partner. That rebuilding takes time. It takes slowness, gentleness, and patience. The body cannot be rushed into trust. It must be invited. Every act of care, every moment of presence, becomes a signal to the body that it can begin to relax. Over time, the body learns that it no longer has to guard against pleasure, that pleasure is safe, even sacred. Pleasure is not indulgence, it's communication. It tells the body that life is safe again, that the heart can open, that connection is possible. It is, in many ways, the most powerful form of medicine. It restores balance, lowers stress, strengthens the immune system, and brings the mind and body into harmony. But above all, it reminds a woman that she belongs fully to herself. When women feel safe in their bodies, when they experience emotional intimacy that honors their truth, pleasure becomes effortless. It's no longer something they chase, it's something they allow. Pleasure then becomes not an outcome, but a presence, a quiet confidence that radiates through every part of life. And this is the heart of it. Pleasure, safety, and intimacy are not separate threads. They are one tapestry. To feel pleasure, a woman must feel safe. To feel safe, she must feel connected. And to feel connected, she must be allowed to be fully herself, seen, heard, respected, loved. When these three forces align, something extraordinary happens. The body awakens, the heart expands, and the soul begins to remember what it feels like to be fully alive. That is the essence of true arousal. Not just the spark of desire, but the deep, peaceful knowing that pleasure and safety can coexist, that the body is not a battlefield but a home. That connection, real, heart-centered connection, is the most powerful aphrodisiac of all. And when that understanding becomes part of how we see women's pleasure, we stop chasing arousal as an act and begin to honor it as an awakening. Shame is one of the most powerful silencers of female desire. It doesn't come suddenly. It creeps in quietly, through messages absorbed over a lifetime. From the way girls are taught to cross their legs, to the way women are told to be careful, not too much, not too loud, not too sexual. Every small correction becomes a thread in a web of shame that eventually wraps itself around the body, dulling its natural rhythm of arousal. And when shame settles in, it doesn't just silence expression, it disconnects women from their very sense of self. Arousal is an embodied language. It speaks through warmth, pulse, breath, movement, but shame interrupts that conversation. It teaches the body that those sensations are dangerous. A woman may feel desire rising in her chest, but the moment she associates that desire with guilt, her body pulls back. Her muscles tighten, her breath shortens, and the natural flow of arousal stops before it can even bloom. The body learns to shut down what feels unsafe, and over time, it forgets how to open at all. This is not because women are broken or repressed by nature. It's because they've been taught to survive in a world that hasn't always welcomed their sensual power. Society often sends a double message. Be sexy, but not too sexual. Be desirable, but don't desire. Be confident, but not bold. These contradictions fracture a woman's relationship with her own pleasure. She begins to perform desire for others instead of experiencing it for herself. Many women grow up with no language for their arousal. They may know how to please a partner, but not how to tune into what truly feels good to them. This silence is cultural. It's reinforced in families, media, religion, even medicine. For generations, the female body was treated as an object of fertility, beauty, or morality, but rarely as a source of wisdom. The clitoris, the only organ designed purely for pleasure, wasn't even fully mapped in medical literature until the 1990s. That's not just an omission. It's evidence of how deeply society has ignored women's pleasure. When shame and silence dominate, arousal becomes disconnected from authenticity. A woman may go through the motions of intimacy without feeling truly engaged. She may feel pressure to perform or to meet expectations, but her inner experience remains muted. She learns to please outwardly while suppressing what she actually feels inwardly. And over time, that suppression shows up not only in the bedroom, but in every area of her life. Her voice becomes softer, her choices more cautious, her confidence dimmer. In truth, arousal and self-worth are intertwined. When a woman feels she is worthy of pleasure, her body responds with openness. But when she feels she must earn it, justify it, or hide it, her body holds back. The nervous system reads shame as danger. It moves her into a state of self-protection, not passion. That's why trauma, judgment, or even subtle criticism can shut down arousal instantly. The body cannot bloom where it doesn't feel safe to exist. Imagine the messages girls receive early on. They hear that boys have urges, but girls have virtue. They see female sexuality portrayed as something to control, not celebrate. They learn that their worth is measured by how desirable they are, not by how deeply they feel. And so they grow up in a paradox, taught to attract attention, but ashamed when they do. This confusion becomes internalized. Even as adults, women may find themselves struggling to embrace desire without feeling guilty or too much. Shame thrives in silence. It feeds on what we don't say, what we keep hidden. The less we talk about women's pleasure, the more distorted it becomes. We label it taboo, we joke about it, we minimize it, but we rarely honor it. And yet, the moment a woman begins to speak openly about her body, to name what she feels, shame begins to dissolve. Truth is the antidote to silence. The healing begins when women realize that their desire is not dirty, excessive, or selfish. It's sacred. Pleasure is not the opposite of morality. It's the essence of vitality. When a woman feels pleasure, her nervous system floods with oxytocin and dopamine, chemicals that reduce stress, build trust, and enhance well-being. Her body isn't misbehaving. It's aligning with nature's rhythm of connection and creation. To deny that is to deny her humanity. Books like Women Who Run with the Wolves by Clarissa Pinkola Estes remind us that the wild feminine, the instinctual, intuitive, sensual part of womanhood has been buried beneath layers of shame. But that wildness is not chaos. It's wisdom. It's the part of a woman that knows when to rest, when to feel, when to say yes, and when to say no. Reclaiming that instinct means reclaiming the body's truth, and with it, the ability to feel deeply alive. When shame is unspoken, it passes silently through generations. Mothers teach daughters not by words but by behavior, by how comfortable they are in their own skin, how freely they express affection, how confidently they talk about their bodies. A daughter watching her mother shrink from her reflection or hush discussions about intimacy learns that pleasure is something to hide, and thus, the silence continues. To break this cycle, we must create spaces where women can speak without fear of judgment, where arousal can be discussed not as something dirty, but as something divine, where the body's signals are not suppressed, but studied with curiosity and compassion. Conversations like these are not indulgent. They are revolutionary. Because when a woman begins to understand her body, she begins to reclaim her power. Every woman carries within her the memory of freedom, the knowing that pleasure once came naturally, before she learned to feel ashamed. That memory lives in the body. It waits patiently for the moment she gives herself permission to feel again. Sometimes it returns through self-touch, sometimes through breath, sometimes through the safety of a loving partner who listens instead of judges. And when it returns, it feels like coming home. But healing from shame is not an intellectual process. It's an embodied one. You cannot think your way into feeling worthy of pleasure. You must feel it. You must meet your body where it is, tense, guarded, uncertain, and listen. You must let your breath soften, your heartbeat guide you, your sensations rise without censoring them. This is how you rebuild trust with your own body. It's a slow process, but every small moment of self-compassion chips away at the old conditioning. Every time a woman says, "I am allowed to feel good," she rewrites history, not just for herself, but for every woman before her who couldn't. That's the quiet revolution happening beneath the surface of healing, the reawakening of women to their inherent right to pleasure. Shame may tell a woman that her body is too much, too emotional, too complicated. But the truth is, her body is exquisite in its complexity. Every nerve, every pulse, every flush of warmth is a message from her inner wisdom saying, "You are alive." When she listens to that message, she begins to move differently, speak differently, love differently. She begins to live from a place of wholeness rather than fear. The world benefits when women reclaim their desire. Because a woman who is unashamed of her pleasure is not easily controlled. She sets boundaries with clarity. She speaks with authority. She connects with empathy. Her arousal becomes a compass, not just for sex, but for life. It points her toward what feels authentic, creative, and true. And yet, this reclamation requires collective courage. We must talk about pleasure not just as an individual experience, but as a societal healing. We must challenge the systems that profit from women's disconnection, from industries that sell shame as beauty, that market silence as virtue, that thrive on the idea that women need to be fixed. The truth is, women don't need fixing. They need freedom. Freedom to feel. Freedom to express. Freedom to exist in their full sensuality without apology. That freedom begins with one powerful realization: that pleasure is not a privilege. It is a birthright. And every woman, regardless of her history, her trauma, or her conditioning, deserves to return to that truth. The moment shame dissolves, the body remembers. It remembers what it feels like to be soft and strong at once. It remembers that arousal is not about someone else's approval, but about her own awakening. It remembers that desire is not dangerous. It's divine communication between body and soul. So the question becomes, what would happen if women stopped apologizing for their desire? What if we stopped calling pleasure selfish and started calling it sacred? What if, instead of teaching girls to hide their fire, we taught them how to tend it, with respect, with care, with joy? The world would change, because when women are connected to their pleasure, they are connected to their power. And power that is rooted in love, not fear, has the ability to heal generations of silence. To reclaim arousal from shame is to return to the truth of being alive. It is to stand in your body and say, "This is mine, this is me, and I deserve to feel." And that, perhaps, is the most radical act of all. Understanding female arousal is not just about sex. It's about healing the relationship a woman has with her body, her emotions, and her sense of power. When a woman understands her arousal, she begins to reconnect with the parts of herself that have been quieted by shame, stress, and expectation. It's as if she rediscovers a language she was always meant to speak, a language written in breath, heartbeat, and sensation. And when that language is reclaimed, everything changes. Because arousal is not a luxury, it's a reflection of how alive a woman feels. It mirrors the health of her nervous system, the balance of her hormones, the openness of her heart. When she is disconnected from her arousal, it's rarely about libido alone. It's a sign that something deeper is blocked. Perhaps she's overextended, emotionally exhausted, or holding trauma in her tissues. The body remembers every time it was told no, every time it felt unsafe, unseen, or unwanted. When those memories remain unhealed, they don't just affect pleasure, They affect energy, confidence, creativity, and connection. True healing begins when women stop treating arousal as something separate from their well-being. When we realize that pleasure and vitality are part of the same system. Arousal is not only the body's preparation for sex, it's the body's expression of life force. It's the physiological way the body says, I am safe, I am open, I am ready to receive. When a woman's arousal system is active and healthy, her immune system improves, her mood stabilizes, her sleep deepens, her stress decreases. Pleasure literally heals the body. Research shows that during orgasm, the body releases oxytocin, endorphins, and nitric oxide, chemicals that lower inflammation, improve circulation, and support emotional bonding. But it's not just biology, it's soul work. Understanding female arousal is understanding how deeply the mind and body are intertwined. The heart cannot open if the body is closed, and the body cannot open if the heart feels unsafe. Healing begins at that intersection. When a woman learns to listen to her body's yes and no, when she honors her rhythms instead of forcing them, she begins to live in alignment with her true nature. That alignment is empowerment. For so long, empowerment has been taught as strength, independence, control. But true empowerment also means softness, sensitivity, and embodiment. It means having the courage to feel fully, even when it's uncomfortable. Because the body's sensations are a form of truth. They guide us toward what nourishes us and away from what drains us. When women reconnect to that internal guidance system, they begin to trust themselves again. That trust is the foundation of self-worth. When a woman understands her arousal, she no longer seeks validation from outside herself. She becomes her own source of fulfillment. She no longer performs pleasure for someone else's satisfaction. She experiences it as her own expression of power. Her sexuality becomes not something to give away, but something to honor. And that shift changes the way she shows up in every part of her life. She sets boundaries that feel natural. She attracts relationships built on mutual respect. She communicates more clearly, not because she's rehearsed, but because she's embodied. There's something magnetic about a woman who is connected to her pleasure. You can feel it in her presence. She's not performing. She's not pretending. She's grounded, radiant, fully alive. That kind of energy doesn't come from beauty products or achievements. It comes from embodiment. It comes from being at home in one's body, from knowing that pleasure is a legitimate part of existence. When a woman feels that, she becomes both tender and powerful, a force that uplifts not only herself, but everyone around her. Understanding female arousal is also essential for connection, because intimacy without understanding is shallow. In relationships, many couples mistake physical closeness for emotional closeness, but the two are deeply intertwined. When partners understand that a woman's arousal depends on emotional safety, trust, and attunement, intimacy becomes more authentic. It stops being about performance and becomes about presence. It's no longer about how to please, but about being truly connected. When a woman feels understood, her body relaxes. When she feels emotionally safe, her arousal flows naturally. It's not forced, it's invited. This is why communication and empathy are as important as touch. A partner who listens without judgment, who values her experience, who doesn't rush her process, becomes part of her healing. The connection deepens because it's built on respect, not expectation. There is a beautiful paradox in understanding arousal. The more we approach it with curiosity rather than goal-seeking, the more freely it unfolds. When a woman feels no pressure to perform, she begins to explore her sensations with wonder. She notices the subtleties, the way her breath changes, the way warmth spreads, the way her heart opens. That awareness is not only sensual, it's spiritual. It's an awakening to her own aliveness. And yet, this awakening requires unlearning centuries of conditioning. For generations, women have been told that their arousal exists to serve others, that their pleasure is secondary. But when women begin to reclaim pleasure as self-knowledge, they challenge that old hierarchy. They begin to say, "My body belongs to me." That statement, simple as it is, carries enormous power. It is the foundation of bodily autonomy, of healing from trauma, of living authentically. When we understand arousal in its full dimension, biological, emotional, and spiritual, we begin to see it as a barometer of wellness. When a woman's arousal is suppressed, It's not just her sexuality that suffers. It's her vitality, creativity, and joy. And when she reclaims that part of herself, healing ripples outward. Her relationships shift. Her self-talk softens. Her ability to experience joy expands. Consider this. A woman's arousal is not separate from her creativity. Both come from the same energy center in the body, the sacral region, the place of creation and desire. When that energy is blocked, inspiration feels distant, life feels mechanical. But when it flows freely, she feels inspired, expressive, and confident. This is why so many women report that reconnecting to their sensuality also reignites their creativity and purpose. Pleasure and passion are not distractions from life. They are the very forces that sustain it. Healing through arousal also means healing through presence. It means slowing down enough to listen to the body's cues rather than rushing to outcomes. In our culture of constant doing, women are praised for productivity, but rarely for presence. Yet presence is the soil from which pleasure grows. When a woman allows herself to be still, to breathe, to feel without judgment, her nervous system resets. The stress hormones that suppress arousal begin to fade. In their place, oxytocin and serotonin rise, creating a sense of calm and connection. That physiological shift alone can transform a woman's relationship with her body and with others. Empowerment through arousal is not about dominance or seduction. It's about authenticity. It's the courage to say, "This is what feels true to me," even when it challenges expectations. It's the confidence to move through the world with a sense of wholeness, not fragmentation. Because when a woman is connected to her arousal, she's connected to her intuition. She can sense when something feels off, when something excites her, when something nourishes her. Her decisions become less about pleasing others and more about aligning with her truth. This kind of embodiment creates deeper connection not only with others, but with life itself. When a woman experiences pleasure, her brain lights up in regions associated with joy, memory, and empathy. She becomes more attuned to others, more compassionate, more creative. Pleasure expands her capacity to love, not just romantically but universally. It fills her with vitality that naturally spills into everything she touches: her art, her relationships, her work. Understanding arousal, then, is understanding the bridge between the physical and the emotional. It's the recognition that pleasure is not separate from purpose, that healing and desire live in the same body. When we honor female arousal, we're not just supporting sexual health, we're supporting human wholeness. The tragedy is that many women live disconnected from this wisdom, not because they are unwilling to feel, but because they were never taught how. They were taught anatomy, not intimacy. They were taught protection, not connection. They were warned about desire, not encouraged to explore it safely. So understanding arousal is not just education, it's reclamation. It's taking back the right to know oneself deeply. In relationships, this understanding can be transformative. When partners learn that arousal is a process of trust and presence, not performance, they begin to cultivate real intimacy. They learn to slow down, to tune in, to build arousal through connection rather than friction. They understand that pleasure grows in the soil of emotional attunement, not pressure. And that realization changes everything. It turns sex from an act into an experience, from performance into communion. But even beyond relationships, understanding arousal empowers women in every domain. In leadership, creativity, and expression, the same energy that fuels desire fuels innovation. A woman who is connected to her pleasure stands in her power with a quiet certainty. She no longer seeks permission to take up space. She knows she belongs. She moves with intuition, speaks with clarity, and inspires others to do the same. This is why understanding female arousal is essential for healing, empowerment, and connection. It touches every layer of who we are. It's the bridge between body and spirit, between individual and collective, between suppression and liberation. When a woman reclaims her arousal, she reclaims her voice. She reclaims her sense of worth. She reclaims her right to joy. Imagine a world where this understanding was the norm, where girls grew up learning that their bodies were sacred, that pleasure was natural, that arousal was nothing to fear. Imagine how that would shape the way they love, the way they lead, the way they live. That world would be softer and stronger at once, rooted in empathy, connection, and truth. The path to that world begins with awareness. It begins when one woman decides to listen to her body instead of silencing it. when she breathes into the spaces that once held shame, when she chooses curiosity over judgment, presence over performance, self-love over approval. In that moment, healing begins, not only for her but for everyone she touches. Understanding female arousal, in its truest form, is understanding life itself. It's understanding that pleasure is not separate from healing, that desire is not the opposite of discipline, that softness and strength can coexist beautifully. It's the reminder that our bodies are not problems to solve. They are vessels of wisdom, power, and love. When a woman feels that truth in her bones, when she honors her body's rhythms instead of resisting them, when she allows pleasure to be part of her healing, she becomes whole. And from that wholeness, everything else, love, connection, creativity, and empowerment, flows naturally. This is why understanding female arousal matters, because it's not just about sex. It's about reclaiming the right to be fully alive.